Okay, so welcome. This is the Excel tutorial for Chapter 2, where I'm going to show you how to do everything from Chapter 2 um, in the textbook, and I'll explain the stuff that's on the screen in just a second. But um, if I'm going to try to do them pretty much in the order that they happen in the notes, which of course are in the videos, I should say, which of course is sort of scattered throughout. But anyway, this should be everything that you need in order to do any of this stuff. So this is also our first Excel video, so I should say this is Excel, of course, that I'm in. I'm recording this on a MacBook, and so this is Excel for Macs. I don't know, whatever the latest version is, I guess. When you go into Excel in whatever computer you're using, um, there's some small differences. You know, it'll look a little bit different. Um, it'll if you have the Windows version, especially any Windows version, you know, the layout's a little different. But you know, it's mostly the same stuff in mostly the same places. You may have more stuff accessible up at the top on the top menus versus some of these sub menus. But anyway, the point is that most of the things we're going to need are just things we're going to type in. So it's okay if your screen looks a little different than mine. Um, there's also a couple of instances, and I think I know all of the times when this will happen, but there are sometimes some functions that obviously were added in later versions of Excel. So if you have the latest version of Excel, you have everything. And if you have an older version, especially sort of a rather old version, you may not have all of you have all of I think you have all the commands that you need. They might just be called something different. But any case, just as a general rule, if you have issues with Excel, or you're having trouble finding something, or how do I do this, just send me an email and let me know um, what the issue is, and I can try to help you through that. So I would say Excel is pretty much, a must, or some sort of statistical software is pretty much a must for doing for working with data. It's really not easy or convenient whatsoever to try to do computations by hand. Even with a calculator, it's not great. And Excel or any sort of statistical package makes it so easy, and you can even have really large data sets and be able to do stuff pretty easily with them. So we choose Excel, or I choose Excel, I guess, for this class, just because it's the most common thing that people already have. Um, and also, it's the most common thing that you're likely to have whenever you might sit down at some point in your school or work life to be like, oh, I have data and I want to do something with it. Chances are the machine you're sitting at has Excel. So I think it's important to know how to do the basic stuff here at least, and at least to be familiar and comfortable enough with Excel that if there's other things you need in the future, that you can, Google videos on how to do whatever it is you might want to do. So anyway, um, okay, so Excel? So this is Excel. If you've never used any sort of Excel whatsoever, or have never used this for anything before, maybe I'll just pull up a blank sheet to show you what your screen probably looks like. There's cells in Excel. There's rows which are numbered, and there's columns which are lettered. Um, and it's just it's a spreadsheet software, so it's just for keeping track of any sort of thing that you might have. And you can just type into the cells numbers or words or whatever you want to type in, and it's happy to do stuff for you and to help you process whatever sort of input you put in here. So, um, and it's you can use the keypad to the up and down, left, right arrows to move around. You can use the mouse to click on a cell. So anyway, it's pretty. I think it's pretty reasonable and self-explanatory, hopefully. Um, so let's get into doing some stuff. Now, the data that I just punched into the sheet that I made up um, a few minutes ago before I started recording. I don't know about you, but I'm getting all these tax documents in the mail right now. So it had me thinking about doing taxes. So I made up some data here that we'll just use as data sets to crunch some numbers, and so that I can show you all the stuff um, that was in the videos for making graphs and doing computations. Let me just say also, before we get into this, I'm not going to ask you to make any graphs of any sort, not a histogram, not a pie chart, not nothing that you really need to actually make the graph and, like print it out or something like that. I'm showing you how to make some of the charts and graphs, though, just because, again, in the real world, you may have occasion to want to actually do this. So I thought I would show you how to do some of the things from there. What you do have to know how to do for the class, though, is that if there is a chart or a graph of some sort that is in a problem, a homework problem or an exam problem, that you're okay understanding what it is and how to read it and how to use it and how to get data off of it and stuff like that. Okay, so that's the only direction that I expect you to be able to do for this course. So don't worry about having to make a graph at all. I don't really even know how you would turn that in since the homework is online. And I won't ask you to make graphs for the exams. So anyway, but I do want to show you how to do that. Okay, so the first thing, so the made-up data set that I have here on the left that you can see is years. I guess this would be the last 15 years of taxes, and someone maybe keeping track of how much they got as a refund over those years. That's the number in the right column here. And when you go to do the homework, you'll have data charts, either just single lists or double lists like this. And you'll see this when you go in there. I don't want to pull one up right now, but when you're doing the homework problems, sometimes the data set is very small. It's only a handful of numbers. So you probably just manually want to copy that into Excel. But for larger charts, when you do the homework problems, there'll be a little box. It'll be pretty obvious. It'll say, click here to see the data. And you click on the box, and it pops up the data. Also, though, in that box, after you pop up the data, there's an option that says something like, move this over to Excel or something like that. It specifically says Excel. If you click on that, it'll open up Excel for you. You don't even have to open Excel. And the data that you were looking at for that problem will already be copied into the spreadsheet, sort of like this. Okay, so use that to your advantage, and that way you don't have to type it in every time. So anyway, in the real world, wherever you collected this data from, you have it, and here it is. So what is one of the first things I think we did was wanting to maybe make histograms, just with some basic numerical data like the refund amount that I got for the last 15 years. So I don't want to go through the whole shebang about computing the intervals and all this stuff, but look at the numbers here, right? The smallest refund was 300, and the biggest refund I think was 2,300. So, you can just sort of maybe get a sense of what sort of intervals do I want to use for my ranges of numbers. And I don't know, to me this seems like maybe $500 would be a reasonable range. So I might go like 100 to 500, and then 600 to 1,000, and so on and so forth. So to do a histogram in Excel, it's just going to look like a bar graph in Excel, there's a couple of ways you can do this, but the easiest way, I think, is just to type in the intervals of numbers you're going to use here, and then just type in how many, what's the frequency, right? How many refunds were in those ranges of numbers. Yes, you can technically use a function to sort of collate the counting for you. But, like I said, I'm not going to ask you to ever do this. So this is mostly just so that if you happen to want to make a graph at work or somewhere else of a histogram of some data, you'd sort of know how to do it. So, so let's not get too bogged down with details. So I'm going to type in here the ranges of numbers, right? So I'm going to do 100 to 500, and then 600 to 1,000, and so on and so on. Now, when you type in, so when you go to type something into Excel, you can sort of either, let me go away from this for a second. If you click on a cell, you can just start typing and it'll go in there. If you sort of want to be extra careful, this bar here is called the formula bar. Whatever I type in here is going to appear in the cell too. So you can also click on this and then start typing and it'll appear in both places. Now, Excel, while it's a wonderful thing, gets a little confused sometimes. Like, for example, if you type in, so I want this first range of numbers to be 100 to 500. So a refund of between 100 and 500. Okay, so if you type it in, it should take that. And the next interval, I'm going to do 600 to 1,000. Oops, 1,000. And then 1,100 to 1,500. And then 1,600 to 2,000. And then I think the last one is 2,100 to 2,500. Okay, so that covers the range of my data, and and they're all equally spaced and all that good stuff. So, all right, so then I have to go through my data. So I'm just using the refund column for now. I'm going to use the year column later. So I'm just going to go through here and count up how many were in this range, how many were in this range, and so on. And to save us time, I already did that. And it's there were 2 in this range and 5 in this range, and so on and so on. So I just grabbed these numbers just by manually counting how many of them fall into each range. Okay, so now armed with this little sort of summary chart, or I think it was called a frequency chart in the video, in the lecture. If you highlight the whole thing, which is usually what you want to do when you're making a graph, is just highlight the whole chart, including the labels. So I put labels here. I just called that the range of numbers or classes or whatever you want to call it. And what are these? These are refunds, so I called this column refunds. If you grab the whole thing, Excel is usually smart enough to be able to say, oh, some of this is labels and some of this is the actual stuff. And it'll be okay with doing that. So I want to make a bar graph or a histogram right now. So where do I go for that? So if you're on a Mac, there's a couple of places you can go. You can hit charts and you'll get some chart options. It's probably obvious I'm going to pick the first one because that's columns, right, or bar graph. I think if you're on a Windows machine, I think you want to hit Insert, and then somewhere down as one of these options, Chart. Chart should be an option. So I think you hit Insert and then Chart, and you get to the same place. I think yours is maybe over here or somewhere else if you're on a Windows machine. But in any case, either of those two things should bring you to something that shows you a whole bunch of chart options, different shapes and styles and things like that. Okay, so to make a histogram or a bar graph, I'm going to pick the first one, which is columns, just sort of a regular old bar graph. And oh my goodness, of course, there's a cajillion options of things. I don't know what the hell a 3D pyramid, who would ever make that as a graph. But anyway, we're going to go old school and pick legit the easiest, most basic graph, which is just your standard bar graph. So I'm going to hit click on this. And if it's smart, which I think it is, yes, good, okay. It made a histogram or a bar graph for us. And of course, this looks right, I think. For this range, $100 to $500, I got 2 refunds that were in that range, and 5 refunds in this range, and so on and so on. And it labels. It usually does a reasonably good job of putting good labels on the graph. So these are my refunds. So blah blah blah. Okay. So don't worry that it's not. I mean, technically histogram. The columns are supposed to be all next to each other, but honestly, who cares? But that's a perfectly nice bar graph, and for whatever data you might have, that might be a good thing to display. Again, you don't have to do this, but of course, if you don't like the appearance, you can right-click and do all kinds of stuff with the appearance. You can change what this says. You can change this to tax refunds, the years 2000 to 2014, just by clicking on it. Right-clicking usually gives you an option to sort of edit style. You can do all kinds of stuff. So obviously, we're not here for that, but if you don't like the color, you can change the color, everything, anything you can imagine. Right-click is sort of your friend. So right-click on the chart, and you'll get all kinds of options of things you might do. Okay, so that's a basic histogram from just a regular set of data. Requires a little bit of work here to just get yourself organized first, but once you got it, you're good to go. And I could have just as easily done relative frequency rather than frequency if I took each of these numbers and divided by 15, which is how many years there are here. There's 15 numbers in my list. If I take each of these and divide by 15, um, it would then change the scale to be relative frequency. So that's what you would see over here. But so do that if you want. You get the same exact shape of a graph. You just have different values over here on the left. And you can change things live. So in other words, you can, you can change these labels, and the graph should adjust accordingly. Well, we can give that a test, I guess. So if I do 2 divided by 15, you can see it. It toggled, or it adjusted the height. So now, of course, it's very low. I should say, what did I just do? Here, let me undo that. So when you're in a column, this is, again, just at no extra charge, some extra Excel advice. When you're in a column, if you want to change this, if I click, you can either click in the cell or click onto the formula bar with it highlighted. What did I want to do? I just said if you wanted relative frequency, you should divide by 15 because there's 15 numbers. So what did I do? So everybody knows where the slash key, and I think everybody knows that means divide. So I'd say divide by 15. Now, I'm not going to hit enter, but if I did, it's not going to like that. It's either going to probably tell me that that's February 15th because it thinks I'm typing in a date, or it's going to, I don't know, do something else. But when you want Excel to actually compute something for you, you have to type equals first, okay? So if you type equals 2 divided by 15, now it knows you want it to do, basically be a calculator right now, right? Do 2 divided by 15 and put the result there. Okay, so now if I hit enter, it says, oh, that's 0.1333, or in other words, 13%. Okay? And so if I, want to see what this looks like as a relative frequency, if I do that same exact thing to each of these numbers, I can see what I get. So I'd say equals 3 divided by 15. That's the same one, so I can just say that's 0.2 because I know they're the same. And equals 2 divided by 15. Or you could do this in a calculator and just type these numbers in yourself. I get that. And as you can see, it updated the chart, right? It did this as I was typing new stuff in, right? And even though it looked a little wonky for a minute, at the end of the day, it came out just right. And now this is a relative frequency histogram or bar graph, because these are now the percentage of time rather than the actual count. Of course, the shape is identical to the one that was up here a second ago. Okay, so that's histograms, and again, lots of other options for bar graphs if you're so inclined. So I'm going to delete this so that it's sort of out of the way, and I think I'm done with it. So I'm going to get rid of that, and maybe I'll actually get rid of that too. But you can just delete, or this has clear content, so I'll hit that. Okay, what else? A pie chart was the other thing in that video. So I had a second question that I made up. This isn't real, but maybe another thing I want to track not only are my refunds, but what method did I use to prepare taxes in each of these 15 years? And let's say that in 3 of the years I did them myself, and for 7 of the years I used H&R Block, and then for 5 of the years I used an online tax preparation thing. So if you want to make so this is if this was a question on a survey, of course, right? These would be how many people said they use these 3 methods, right? So 3, 7, 5, or in this case, it's the same person but just different years, right? What kind of method did you use? So if I want a pie chart for this data, I should do the same thing. I'm going to grab it. I don't think it's going to let me grab the question, but it'll let me grab the other, the data and the labels, right? So it'll let me grab these. These don't have to be percentages. These you can leave as just numbers, 3, 7, 5. Okay, so they can just be the frequencies. So highlight that whole, highlight all of that. Actually, I'm not sure. Maybe you can highlight the. Oh, let's highlight the whole thing and see what happens. Even the sort of title of the graph. Let's see if it's smart enough to grab that. Okay, so now I want to do a pie chart. So again, if you're on a Windows machine, I think you go to Insert and Chart, and you get a whole bunch of chart options. Hopefully one of them kind of looks like a pie, and here's mine right here. So I'm going to hit that. And again, there's lots of pie options. Again, I don't know what any of these things are. Let's just go with a regular old pie graph. And okay, so it wasn't smart enough to deal with the how do I prepare my taxes. So, okay, so that experiment failed. So let me just delete that. And let me just grab these instead. So don't grab your title of the graph. You can put that on later if you really want to. Okay, so let me go back to the pie again, and I pick pie, and it makes a perfectly nice pie graph. It is smart enough to grab the labels of which, what colors what, um, and that looks about right, right? Self-prepared is blue, that's 3. Uh, Tax Act is 5, and that's green, and H&R Block is 7, and that's red. And look, if you sort of put the mouse over top, it tells you um, the values. Now, if you want the values on here, you can just, again, right-click as your friend. So if I right-click on the pie chart, anywhere on the pie chart, one of the options is to add labels. So try that. And as you can see, it now puts the labels on here. Right? It says 3, 5, and 7. Now, again, just like with the histogram, if you want percentages instead, you can just come back here and change these. Okay? So just do it the same way we did the other one. I'm going to say now there were 15, right? So 3 out of 15. 7 out of 15. And 5 out of 15. And now you get percentages. Okay? And if you want them to be, you know, out of 100 instead of the decimal, just multiply each of the numbers by 100 here. I don't want to do that and take more time, but you could do 20% and 46.6% and 33.3% if that's what you want instead. Okay, I'm sure there's a way that if you right-click on this, you can add a title or add, add some extra text if you want to put a title on this, and so on and so on. Okay, but that's a pie chart. That's a basic pie chart if you ever want to make one. So I'm going to delete that. I should say, how do you delete? If you just sort of click on the frame of the chart, and sort of highlight the chart, and then just hit delete on your keyboard, it'll delete any chart that you made. So, okay, I can leave that there. All right, so we did histogram, we did pie chart. What else? So if you have paired data, which is why I made up a data chart that had 2 columns here, and you wanted to make, what are the things we made? We made a scatter diagram, and we made a time series plot. I'm going to do those both at the same time here. So let's say I wanted to plot the relationship, basically, between the year and the refund. If I want to do that, highlight the whole chart again. And again, go to Insert Chart if you're in a Windows machine. If you're on a Mac, you can just go to Charts. And you'll see an option that kind of hopefully looks something like this. Looks like a scatter. Mine says scatter. And hopefully it kind of looks like just a scatter diagram here. So I'm going to grab this. Now, both of the options we want are here. If you just want the dots, pick this first option. And that's exactly what you're going to get. You're going to get, move this over here. You're going to get the years down here and the refund amount, right? So that's these dots here. And so this is what I think we called in the notes a scatter plot. And it just shows you, is there a relationship? Is there a trend? Blah, blah, blah. In this case, there looks to be a trend that as I go on in years, the refund gets higher, probably just due to salary going up or things like that, or other factors. Maybe you just get smarter at doing your taxes, whatever. But anyway, that's a picture of it right there. Now, if you wanted, so that's a scatter plot. we're going to come back and do lots of scatter plots later in the semester when we start to talk about how to put like a line through this and do all kinds of other cool stuff. But for now, if you want, that's a scatter plot. So let me delete that. And let me go in and make a time series plot, as it was called in the notes. So it's in the same tab with scatter. It's just scatter with a line. And you can do curved if you want, but that's not going to look like the example we did. This one with the straight lines on it, either with dots or without dots. The with dots are kind of nice. So I'm going to pick this one. And this gives you what I think in the lecture we were calling a time series plot, because it gives you the data, which is the same data we'd had up here just a second ago, but it connects it with lines, okay, to sort of try to give you a sense, maybe a little more visual sense of this is a continuous process that's kind of happening over time, which for tax refunds isn't really the case because you just do it once a year, but it'd be more so the case that if this is something that's measured once a year, that actually exists every day, then this maybe is a more appropriate thing to do because it sort of says, okay, well, if it was here one year and here at the same time the next year, it had to sort of travel along this path, which probably isn't so much true with tax refunds. But anyway, all right, so that's a time series plot. And I think that's the end of the graphs that we looked at in the notes. So, and again, just for one last time, I'll say it. I'm not going to have you make any graphs to turn in or anything. This was mostly just in case you want to ever make one for your senior thesis or other things. You'd be surprised how many, how often data sets come up in doing senior thesis. So anyway, you might forget all of this by then. But at least that you know it's possible means you can probably figure it out later on your own. And obviously there's lots of other options for other types of graphs, so go crazy. All right, so the thing that's actually much more important is for me to show you how to do the basic computations that we talked about in chapter 2, which I think was in sections 3, 4, and 5 of chapter 2, which is all of the measures of center and the standard deviation. That's important. And the quartiles and percentiles as well. All right, so for that, I'm just going to use the refund column here. I don't need this column anymore. Maybe I'll just delete it so it's not confusing. So, I should say, I keep doing stuff without explaining. If you want to get rid of a column altogether, if you sort of click at the top in the column label, it'll highlight the whole column for you. And again, you could either go through the menus or just right-click on it. And delete is one of the options. And Excel is pretty smart that it'll shift everything to the left when you delete it. Okay, so that just leaves me with my column of refunds, which again for us is just a list of numbers, right? I mean, yes, they correspond to tax refunds, but okay. So maybe I'm going to just make this all a little bit bigger so we can see a little bit better here. Okay, so here's my list of data, and again, you either manually entered this or you grabbed it from the homework. You've asked it to open in Excel, or you have some big data set, 500 numbers that you've collected from the Census Bureau or something like that. Okay, but here's our data, and it's sitting in a file. It's sitting in a spreadsheet here. So, all right. So, what are some of the basic things we wanted to be able to compute? So we wanted to be able to compute things like the mean and median. The mode, I don't know, maybe there is actually a command for mode, but let's be honest. I mean, mode, you could just look at it and probably figure out the mode. And you're not going to really compute that a whole heck of a lot, so I wouldn't worry too terribly much about that. Let me make this just a little smaller. Make sure I have enough space. All right, so how do I do all these things? So just go to any empty cell, and we're now going to mainly just be using Excel as sort of a super calculator. So let's say I want to compute the mean and the median and the standard deviation. And I'm going to do also the first quartile and the third quartile. And maybe just for fun, I'll also do something like the 80th percentile. Okay, so I just type these in manually just so that we remember what the results are, which are going to go here in the first column. Okay, so I just type these things in. You don't have to type them in, just so that I don't forget later on what these things were. Okay, so how do I get Excel to do these things and more for us? All right, so just go to any blank cell. I'm going to pick the one that's right under the column here of data. And I'm going to go, you could just start typing or go click again if you want. Click on the formula bar here. Now, I'm going to tell it to use some commands. Each of these, 6 things that I'm going to ask it to do, there's a command that corresponds to that statistic that I want to compute. So all I have to do for it to compute the mean is say, basically communicate to them, hey, Excel, I want you to compute the mean or the average. So the way to tell Excel you wanted to do something, the first thing, I already said this, but the first thing you have to do is say, well, I want you to do something. So I'm going to type an equal sign. That's always the first thing I'm going to do in order to tell Excel, I'm about to give you a problem to do. Now I could do math here, right? I could do equals, 6 plus 9, and it'll tell me that's 15. Okay, but that's not what I want to do right now. I want to compute the average of these numbers that's sitting right here. All right, so the good thing about Excel is that it's very user-friendly. So if you want it to do something for you, you have to sort of come up with what's the command for that. Well, that would be a pain if the commands weren't so nicely named. So I want to do the mean, which is also known as the average. Now, it'd be nice if I could just start typing that and it would say, oh yeah, I know what to do. And the good news is you can. So I want this to compute the average of these numbers, so I'm literally just going to start typing average, A-V-E-R-A-G-E. Okay. And I'm going to put an open bracket. So usually as you start typing, I think that'll happen maybe when I go to the next one, usually it starts to sort of suggest something to you. But in the event that it doesn't, which is what happened to me there, just type the whole word. And and then what else did I type? I typed an open parenthesis. Now what happened here? Let me back up for a second. So as I'm typing, okay, A-V-E-R-A-G-E, average, and then I hit an open parenthesis. And look up here at the bar when I hit the open parenthesis. So what that means is that it recognized, so the fact that this popped up, this little link here, I guess, popped up, means it recognizes that average is a command that it knows how to do. Again, usually as you start typing, and probably as you guys are doing it, when you start typing, it suggests things to you. I don't know why that didn't happen there, but maybe it'll happen the next time. But in any case, if you type out the whole word and put an open parenthesis, if Excel recognizes the command that you just typed in, you'll get a little help sort of thing right here. If you don't get that, it doesn't know what you mean. And if you try to do it, it's just going to give you an error. But anyway, okay, so hopefully this happened for you. Again, the equal sign is really important. If you don't put the equal sign, it's not going to know what you're doing. But if you type equals and then the word average, and then put a parenthesis, an open parenthesis, you should get something like this. Okay, so one thing I'll just say for all of these commands is that Excel is also trying to be very helpful, that if you click on this link, which I'm going to do right now, you get help, a help page, I guess, right? And it's all about this command that you just typed in. And in fact, it tells you everything. It says the average function. What is that? Oh, it's going to return, or it's going to compute the average or arithmetic mean. Well, wonderful. That's exactly what we wanted. And it tells you what the syntax is. In other words, it tells you the things that it wants to do the average of, or it gives you the parameters. It even, if you scroll down, it gives you an example and says, look, if this is your data and you type this in, it's going to tell you blah, blah, blah. And it gives you some other functions that are kind of related, or sort of related. So use the help. I know sometimes help menus are sort of not that actually helpful, which is ironic, but Excel's pretty good in terms of trying to help you out here. Gives you some tips and so on and so forth. Okay, so if you get confused or get lost, try just clicking on the link there and it'll open up the help menu. Okay, the other thing it does for us is it tells us what does this function want. So, in computer programming in general, the idea is if you call some sort of function, you have to say, all right, I want you to do an average, but now I have to tell you, well, the average of what? So generally, that usually mostly just consists of highlighting of saying, well, where's the data? And indeed, that's what it's looking for here. It's looking for what's the first number, what's the second number, and so on and so on. Now, obviously, if I had to manually type 500, 600, 300, 700, which I could do, that wouldn't really save me a whole hell of a lot of time. So, of course, what's good about Excel is that I don't have to type in all of these numbers. If I just highlight the range of numbers, that's just as good. In other words, it knows then where they are. So that's all I'm going to do. I'm going to start. You can start at the top or the bottom. It doesn't matter. But I'm going to highlight just the numbers. Don't highlight the label, but just the numbers. So I'm going to click on 500 and then drag all the way down to the bottom of my data, which is 2300, and let go. And as you can see, it's going to still be sort of highlighted or flashing or whatever. And what else happened? Okay, so in the formula bar here, it put what? It put A2 colon A16. Well, A2 is the 500, right? It's column A, row 2. And 2300, which is the last number, is column A, row 16. So basically, what does that mean with a colon in between? Is it says I'm going to do the average of the numbers that are in that range. And in particular, of course, it's highlighted here. Okay? So I'm going to put a closed parenthesis or a right parenthesis just on the keyboard. And now I'm going to hit enter, and I'm hoping it tells me the average or the mean of these numbers. And it does. So 1200 apparently is the average or the mean of these numbers. Okay? Now if you want to move stuff around, this makes me nervous that it's sitting right next to the data. I should have probably left a space there. This is probably just me being OCD. But if you wanted to maybe move everything down, again, right-click is your friend. So if I right-click right here on the 17, you can insert a row, and it just moved everything down one, which makes me feel better because now it's not right up against the data. And I'm very weird. So anyway, all right, so mean done. So 1220 is apparently the average of these numbers. You could probably check that with a calculator, but I'm going to go ahead and believe Excel. Okay, median next. So median, I'm going to do it the same way I did the mean, which is I'm going to start typing. I'm going to type an equal sign first, and then I'm going to start typing a command that I hope maybe corresponds to median, which I don't know, maybe median might be a good command to try. So I'm going to start typing median. Okay, so this is what normally happens. I don't know why it didn't happen last time. But as you start to type M-E-D-I, all right, you can see, right, it's suggesting median. Oh, is that the one you want? So I can click on this, or you can just keep typing the word median. But I'm going to click on it. And it does the same thing it did before, right? Except, I guess I was up here last time, but now it's sort of right there. So, okay, well, anyway. It says, all right, median, I think that's the thing you want. Again, I could click on this and get a little bit of help if I click on the link here. But I think I'm cool. So what does this want? Again, this looks just like mean, doesn't it? It just wants to know where are the numbers. So I'm going to do the same thing I did a second ago, which is I'm just going to highlight the numbers in my data. So I'll start at the bottom this time, click and drag and highlight that whole column of numbers, just the numbers, not the labels. And it did the same thing it did before, right? It grabbed A2 to A16, which is right, that's correct. And so I'm just going to hit enter. And so the median is apparently 1100, which seems about right, without diving too much into this data set. It's possible the 1100's in the middle. So I'm happy with that. All right, moving right along, standard deviations next, which is a real pain to do by hand or with a calculator. So this is a real time saver that Excel can do this very easily for us. Okay, so standard deviation, same routine. I type an equal sign first. And then again, right, naively, I say, I don't know, I want standard deviation. Maybe there's a function called standard deviation. Let's start typing. S-T, and you can probably already see there are, at least on my version, there are many versions of standard deviation. These all stand for standard deviation. you may have these, or you may have different ones, or not as many. In general, we're always just going to sort of stick with the plain one, or just the regular one. So I'm going to just pick this one, the STDEV, or again, keep typing out standard, or this abbreviation. But I'm going to pick this one. That's just sort of a basic standard deviation. So I'm going to pick that. And again, I could click on the help if I want, but this is asking for the same thing as the last two, so I'm pretty happy. I'm just going to go and highlight one more time, just the numbers. It did the same thing, grabbed the same range, so if I hit enter, it should tell me that the standard deviation is about $650. Which, let's think about this for a minute. So that's saying on average, my refunds are about $650 away from the mean, which is $1,220. And just looking at the numbers, let's see. So $600 or $650 away from $1,220. A lot of them are, and some of them are a little further away. So sure, that seems like a reasonable number to represent the average deviation from 1220. So, all right, so that's a big relief. Being able to do the standard deviation with such an easy little, line there is pretty good. Okay. All right, so the last three are these quartiles. So if you want to do quartiles, let's try the same idea. I'm going to type equals, and then just start typing quartile. Q-U-A. Okay, I didn't have to type a whole lot. And it suggests quartile. And again, there's a couple of variations of quartiles. These mainly are, the difference between these is, when you sort of do the half lists, do you include the median or not? And I think that's what the difference between these two. Again, I'm going to always just try to stick with the basic one. You can use any of them, to be honest. I mean, the difference between one and the other one is so small in any real life scenario that it doesn't really matter which one you use. But I'll try to just stick with the plain one. So quartile. So I grab that. Now, I will say, okay, this is a little different, right? So now this is asking for something called an array. Now, an array is just a list of numbers. So I don't know why they didn't just say that, but what does quartile want? It wants the data. Oh, okay, so this sounds just like these guys, right? So let me go and highlight the data. Okay, and as you can see, it did the same thing that it did for the last three times, so I'm pretty happy with that. But now let's just say I'm just going to hit enter. Okay, so I get an error, and it tries to tell me what the error is. Not enough arguments were entered for this function. Okay, so what does that mean? So let's see. So when I'm looking at this, right, it's true. It wanted the list. That's what the array is called. But look, it wanted something else. And moreover, I think there is something else I need to tell it, right? Because if I want the first quartile and not the third quartile, I haven't told it that yet. Oh, good. Well, that's what this second thing is that it wants to know, is basically which quartile. So the syntax for that, so I grab the data. The data's there. That's what's in blue. That's saying, yes, 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 I know where the data is. Now, if there's a second parameter or a second argument, you have to put a comma between them. You can see it right there, right? Oops, sorry, I got the goofy hand. But there's a comma right there after array. So I'm going to type on the keyboard, comma. And as you can see, it actually now is highlighting the other thing, right? And saying, okay, now I'd like you to tell me which quartile you want. Oh, I want the first one. So I'm going to type 1. Okay? Now if I hit enter, okay, that sounds better. So 700 is the first quartile. And now I want the third quartile. So I think I can probably just do the same thing. But instead of the first quartile, I want the third one. So I'm going to type a 3 instead. So let's see, I'll do the same thing, equals quartile. And I'll grab that. And I'll grab the data. And I'll put a comma. And now I want the third quartile, so I'm going to type 3 and enter. So the third quartile is apparently 1750. Okay, and in the event that you want a percentile, which again is just a number that says, okay, 80%, or oh, sorry, if we say the 80th percentile, then 80% of my refunds are under this amount and 20% are more than it. So if you want to do a percentile rather than a quartile, well, I don't know, let's just try it. So I'm going to type equals, and then I don't know, percentile, I guess. I'll just start typing percentile, P-E-R. So, oh, okay, look at that, right? An option comes up for percentile. So I'm gonna grab that. So click on that, and now it's saying, okay, again, array is code for where's the data. So let me highlight that. Now it wants a second thing also, and they've really not done you a big favor here because they just called it K. So let me hit comma, and now, I mean, you can maybe guess what that is. It's the, remember, we're trying to do the 80th percentile. So that's probably somehow 80 or something like 80. But you could also click, you can see, right, if you don't know what K is, if I click on the help menu, it's going to tell me what K is. And I'll save us the trouble. What it's going to tell us is that it's the percent, it's the percentile. It's 80th. If you want the 80th percentile, type in 80%. But again, remember, when we type percents, we always have to type them as decimals, right? So 80% isn't 80, it's 0.80. Okay? So if I hit enter now, 1920 apparently would say that 80% of my refunds are under that amount, which means, of course, 20% of them are more than that amount, which that kind of looks about right. I think there's only 3 of them that are more, and 3 out of 15 oh, actually, is exactly 20%. So, it doesn't always work out exactly right with small data lists like this one, but any real data list is going to have hundreds of things in it. So, even if these are off by a hair, you have so much data that it doesn't really matter. Your results are going to be about the same. Okay, so that's the Excel tutorial video. I think I showed you everything. You mainly just need this stuff, right? This is the main thing you need to answer questions um, for the homework, is to be able to do these computations in a matter of seconds, literally seconds, uh, which is a huge, huge, huge time saver. So hopefully you're finding that you can do these things. And again, send me an email if you have any questions.